Shalom for those of you who are joining us on YouTube. We are about to get started. Just wanted to welcome you to another Shabbat with us. And thank you for your participation, for listening in. Thank you for listening to the entire messages. I know they're long, and I know that they're uncut, they're not edited or anything. Eventually I'll probably get back to editing my Shabbat videos, but right now there's a lot going on, so it's been difficult to facilitate that. So it's easier to just DVR these messages. So thank you for your patience and your kindness concerning that, and your patience with the technology as it is operating. At any rate, we are well into our Deuteronomy parashas, which leads us right up to Sukkot. And I can tell you it has been a Deuteronomy kind of week. What do I mean by that? It's been very esoteric, but it has been very trying in this realm of formation. When I talk about the realm of formation, I'm talking about the difference between the realm that Yahweh created, where there are forces moving, and those are spiritual forces, what we may or may not like to call entity, energy, vibes. And then there's the realm of the formation, which is height, width, depth, time. Height, width, depth, time, characterizing what? A quantifiable, measurable world, right? Well, of course, the other worlds are not quite like that, right? The realm of action, the realm of intensifying, the realm of foundations, all of those have to do with different ways in which Yahweh, or the intensification of all power in the universe, interacts with them, okay? But in our realm, we are basically the superior species. We are the superior spiritual entity here, and we are the superior physical entity here. So we are superior in our animal existence. We are superior in our spiritual existence, and we are superior in our physical existence. Or I should say civil existence. Although there are animals out there that have structures or governments or have associations that are organized, human beings are the only ones that can actually exact social justice, even distribution, without instinct. Okay, so the reason why this is important is because when we are experiencing these realms, we react certain ways and we think that they are certain things. If there was ever anything that I can tell you would be a simple underlying communication in Scripture, in Tanakh, in the latter writings, in the discussion of the Brit Chadashah, the quote-unquote new covenant, etc., it's this: things are not what they seem. Yahweh asked me a question on Sunday morning while I was out with a friend. He said, why did the scripture say that the Messiah would not judge with the sight of his eyes, nor with the hearing of his ears. And when we think about this, we know that that is consistent throughout his experience here in the world of formation. Why is this important? This is important because in the world of formation, he was not received. But those who did receive him, he gave them the right to be sons of God. Now, in that process, it's very important to understand Christ, Yeshua, Jesus Christ of Nazareth, was a political pawn in Caiaphas's pocket, in Pilate's pocket, and Agrippa's pocket, in the pocket of the Romans, in the pocket of the Sanhedrin, etc. Because of his popularity and because of his disassociation from people groupings in such a way that would indicate that he was kind of his own rabbi, he was not received. If he was the judge with the sight of his eyes or the hearing of his ears, he would have seen social injustice being exacted upon himself. And don't get me wrong, the mechanism of reciprocation saw it. And I promise you, those who were involved came to horrible fates. However, he asked, why did he not judge with the sight of his eyes or the hearing of his ears? Because he knew something. He knew about the realm of action, how it works, and what's going on in it. So in the process of our needing to understand, we have to kind of glean from the underlying information in Scripture, the undertones, as it were, that are kind of in between the words. In fact, rabbis believe that there is esoteric knowledge to be had in these white spaces. That these white spaces, these parashas, are actually wisdom. That the entire Torah scroll contains wisdom. So in the process of understanding, we need to see that what we see in front of us is not necessarily what is actually presenting. And I think that's going to be important in these coming days. There's a few reasons why that's important. Number one, we know that we are in the season right now where the bride as an entire entity. Let's talk a minute about that a moment. It doesn't say brides. There's no plural there. It says bride. So who's the bride? The bride of Yeshua, Yisrael, is the bride of Yahweh in the Torah, is the church, is the ecclesia, or ecclesia is actually a combination of the word ek and glacius, which is the concept of being called out, which is derived from the Hebrew word kahal, which means assembly in the sense of there being a gathering, okay? And the word kahal uses a kof, which is the drawing of the sunrise or sunset, the intensification of light at that moment as the sun just peaks or is just leaving the horizon, and there's that really bright moment of pinpoint light. Call that intensification or condensation. There's a condensing. Well, in the Hebrew, the word kahal, it means to gather to the staff. It's the shepherd's crook. It's the intensification, or the idea of gathering of light, or the condensing of people at a point. And the condensing of people at the point is at the point of the staff, or the authority of the shepherd, the voice of the shepherd. In fact, that word doubles as the word voice. Not only is kahal to gather an assembly together, but also kol, which is kol flamed, same root word, is voice. Now, the reasons why these are important is because when we are talking about the idea of humans stepping into a state of social justice or injustice, we have a tendency to look at this realm for the answers. The problem is that there's a lack of understanding about what's going on in the other worlds. So we're going to discuss that a little bit today. We're going to talk about forces, and we're going to talk about the action, the world of action, or the world of asiyah, which is basically a place where forces are moving. Okay, so one of the first things that we want to do is we're going to discuss some things really quick. So the first thing I want to do is I want to show you the Shema, okay? The Shema in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4. You say, well, why do you want to show me that? I'm going to show you. Okay, so now let's start by, what we'll do is we'll start actually in Deuteronomy 6 on the tablet, and we will take a look at 6:4. Listen, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord alone, right? In other ones, hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one, right? But what you don't realize is that these verses are on a page that can be turned. And if I was to actually turn the page, then all of a sudden we are on chapter 7. Chapter 7, of course, reads through until verse 11, and that's the end of last week's parasha. Last week's parasha ended in verse 11, okay? Now, in the scroll, that does not necessarily look that way. I will remind you guys, let's talk a minute about a codex. A codex was a scroll that had been cut up, sewn together, and you could turn the pages to the section that you wanted to read. Whereas right now, if I was to take this scroll and try to go to Genesis chapter 11, all that you see on the thick side would have to become the thin side. So all that you see right here on this side would have to reverse. It'd have to change. That's because it's a scroll. It doesn't have pages you can turn to. There's a few reasons why this is so important. So my camera might be a little bit off, but we're in a minute, I'm going to show you something. What I want you to see here is I can just easily flip between these two pages. Back and forth, right? But what you don't see is the connections, okay? the connections. And so because of that fact, sometimes we miss very important wisdom that might be made available to us. So turning the page to chapter 7, when you're on chapter 6 or looking at the next page, you don't think about the connection between the two. I'm going to show you what I mean. So in this case, in Deuteronomy 6, verse 4, it says, listen, O Israel. Listen, O Israel. Okay. But then in the parasha beginning this week, it says, if you listen. Okay. If. We're going to get to that. But the first thing that I want to do is I want to show you the difference between a codex and a scroll. So in this case, we're going to take a look at the scroll real quick here. Now, at the top of the page here, right here, you can see that this is the Shema, okay? The reason why this is important, and let me go ahead and let me zoom in for you and see if I can't get that adjusted to where it's really visible. Okay, let's zoom in. And let's pull this down a little bit. So now you can see there is Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, or Yahweh Eloheinu, Yahweh Echad. But I also want you to see that there are enlarged letters in the scroll. The Ayin and the Dalet. Okay, the Ayin and the Dalet. So, of course, the Ayin and Dalet make up the word Ad, which is the word witness. Okay, witness. But what I want you to see is this word Shema here. See that? Now, let's zoom out and let's move the Shema up a little bit towards the top. And I want you to see this right here. That right there, okay? So you saw the Shema, now you see the location of this in connection with the Shema. You see there's not a lot of distance to travel. No pages being turned. It's right here in your face. Well, as you guys know, a parasha is one of these sections. There's either a closed one or an open one. This is a petuach. This is a stumach. Okay, the stuma and the petuach. Now, these are Torah portion breaks. However, the Torah portion break that is significant, these are all Torah portion breaks, but the Torah portion break that's significant is this word right here. I'm going to leave the finger here, okay, so that you can see the location. And I'm going to try and move this. Oh, see, it's not working here. Let's try setting it like that right there. Okay, so that's pointing at the word that I want you to focus on. I'm going to move this over a little bit, down a little bit, and then we're going to zoom in on it. Okay, that word right there is ekev. If you were to go into a parasha schedule of some sort, then you would find that ekev is the Torah portion this week. Deuteronomy 7:12, ekev. Now, the reason why this is important is because of this right next to the word ekev. Okay? That is Tish Mun. Tish Mun. So let's go ahead and put that up on the board for a moment and take a look at that. Let's see, we will do the Hebrew in purple, we'll do the text in yellow, and we'll do the fine point text in green. Okay, so we have the Hebrew word tish. Mun. Tishmun. Okay. Now, what's important about this is the grammar. So what we're going to do, we're going to take a look at the grammar really quick here in the tablet. What we'll do is jump over here into the interlinear and jump over to Tishmun, and we're going to look at the grammar real quick. So the grammar is the imperfect second person, okay? And then it has this noon at the end, which is a paragogic noon, So real quick, we'll open up our etymological dictionary. So we need to know what the word paragogic is. Did I spell it wrong? Paragogic, no. Okay. Okay, doesn't look like that's actually going to pull up on this one. So we will, give me a second. I'm going to preview the definition before I pull it up, because sometimes inappropriate ads are on the search engine. So we're just going to go with definition. Paragogic. It looks like we're going to be good to go on our content. So we'll just put this here. Of or pertaining to a paragogue. Okay, so let's jump to that. A paragogue is the addition by growth or accident of a non-significant letter or syllable to the end of a word, opposed to prosthesis. Okay, so let me explain to you what's going on here, what a paragogic letter is. I was hoping that it would explain it a little better, but we're just going to go with this. That final noon at the end of that thing doesn't belong. It's there as either a mistake in writing the word or however. And now I'm not talking about a mistake in writing the word as in the Torah scroll itself, because if that were the case, then they would not keep copying it to Torah scroll after Torah scroll after Torah scroll. But it sits there for a reason. Now, there's a lot of little anomalies like this in Torah, and the rabbis conclude that Moses put them there to call out things, to identify things. And of course, in this case, they believe that it's to call out the Shema. So let's take a look at what we've got on the board here. Okay, so this is Tishmun. So we know already that we can just kind of eliminate that, right? Okay, so in this case, this right here is second person. So we can parse that part of that this suffix and this, I'm sorry, that prefix and this suffix are that they don't belong there. And actually, I missed a letter. Give me 1 second to fix that. That's an important letter too. Okay. There we go. All right, now we can do the Vav. Final noon. We can cross out the final noon. We can say that this Vav is a suffix and this Tav is a prefix. And as a result of these two letters, we get second person, right? Second person. So if we drop those, we remove those, then all we have left is Shema. Okay? Which means to listen, right? Obey. Hear. Okay? Now, I'll remind you that in the Hebrew language, there is a whole lot of idioms going on, and Hebrew is an idiomatic language. What does it mean that Hebrew is an idiomatic language? It means that if we were to say, use the idiom, let the cat out of the bag. If we were to use the idiom, let the cat out of the bag, and we were to be talking to somebody here in America in the English language, one of the things that we would immediately know is that meant that somebody told a secret. Well, it would be very easy to just say such and such told a secret. So let's say, John has a secret and he tells it to Tim, and then Tim goes to Joe and tells that secret. So we know that Tim let the cat out of the bag. Joe was not supposed to know. John confided in him, etc. But instead of John going to somebody and saying, man, that Tim, he's a dirty, no good person, he told my secret, he would go to him and say, man, Tim let the cat out of the bag. So now, in Hebrew, you would never say he told a secret. In Hebrew, you would always use the idiom, let the cat out of the bag. And that's how they speak. They speak in all these symbols and idioms and figures of speech. There's never a function of a literalism to their talking. As a result of that, death doesn't mean death, life doesn't mean life, listen doesn't mean listen, walk doesn't mean walk. Come on. How many people walk with God and don't ever take a step, right? It's an idiom. It's an idiom. And so one of the reasons why this is important is because when we start to get into Hebrew idioms, we get into some interesting stuff. For example, deshen chalav v'deshen lashono, tachat lashono, is milk and honey under his tongue. What does that mean? That means that he has a sweetness to his speech, right? But why would they use it as an idiom? Because it's actually indicating that the person is a liar. So in Hebrew, if you hear milk and honey under his tongue, he's actually a deceitful person. So there's a few reasons why this is important. The reason why this is important is because when we're dealing with Hebrew idioms, we need to be careful to know exactly what it's saying. If you hear somebody say, oh, he has milk and honey under his tongue, well, there's kind of sort of this principle that he's he speaks kindly, right? No, he's a deceiver, right? But you can't know that. Why? Because milk and honey is a reference to the promised land, which is supposed to be a good thing, right? Okay. So we have an idiom, which is the idea that when you are walking, the last thing to take a step is your back heel, okay? So the back heel becomes this step, or the final thing to touch the dirt as you take a step is your heel, and the back heel of the back leg as you're taking that step. Well, they use that as an idiom. So they literally say the heel of something, the heel of a circumstance, the heel of a material item, the heel of a person walking is the end of that step. And in Hebrew thought, the end is accompanied by the result. In Hebrew thought, the end is accompanied by the result. And so in the mind of a person who is thinking like a Hebrew, when they think of the end step, they're thinking of the reward or consequence, or what we would call the effect, right? The cause and effect. They think of the effect of something as the final part of a situation, an object, whatever, okay? There's a few reasons why this is important. And we'll get back into this in a moment, but what I want you to think about is when we're dealing with the idiomatic usage of something, we need to better understand it in terms of its original storytelling. Hebrews are storytellers, and they blessed us with their stories on their pottery. And their stories were little picture stories. They sat down and they drew a little house, and they drew a cow, and they drew a sun in the sky. They drew all these things to try to tell their story. You know, a Hebrew would be sitting there chilling while he's waiting for the afternoon to cool off. He'd be sitting back in his tent, messing with a scribe and messing with a piece of pottery, and he'd start just drawing these pictures. Well, these pictures, when combined into pairs, became communicatable words. And if you go back into the ancient languages like Sumerian, Akkadian, Proto-Sinaitic, ancient Semitic, those somewhat are all the same. There's some differences, but they all kind of have the same syllabification. They have the same linguistic pronunciations. So as a result of that, basically what we have is we have a communication on these pottery shards that reflects the modern day Hebrew that's written in our Torah scroll. As a result of that, we can go back and we can learn the story behind the word. Well, we have two words that we need to explore today. The first word is, of course, the Shema, and the second word, of course, is the word Kev. We're going to go ahead and cheat because we don't have time to really dig deep into them. We've got a whole nother part to this discussion that we need to address. So let me go ahead and we'll just jump right into the the verse here. So we're going to just start with a Kev, and we're just going to jump right into the Strong's Concordance number, grab it, head over to the ancient Hebrew lexicon of the Bible, and Oh, that's not the lexicon. Okay. And we are going to, there it is. So we are going to remove the H from the Strong's Concordance number and search that number out and see where it pulls up. If it pulls up into the adopted roots or the child roots, we don't know yet, but let's take a look at what we've got. Okay, so here's the word ekev, Strong's Concordance 6118. Okay, then we've got ekeva, which is a subtly, as appearing to be hidden in the sense of restraint. Okay, and then we've got akov, which means crooked, right? Then we've got a cognate where the kof is replaced by the kof, or I'm sorry, the kof is replaced by the kof at the heel, right? Okay, so, but let's go back this direction and see if it is actually a word that is going to end up in a parent root or not. And in this case, what we have is the parent root ayin kof, ayin kof. And so the added letter in this case, since it's the, I'm sorry, the ayin kaf, ayin kaf. You know, we need to talk a minute about cognates really quick. A cognate is where you have a connection between a Hebrew word that has one letter and a Hebrew word that has another letter where the letters sound the same. So in this case, ayin kaf is not ayin kof, but ayin kaf is ach and ayin kof is ak. A combination of those two, they say, are not combination of those two, but you see how they sound the same. And so there's a connection between the two. That's called a cognate. Okay, so, and there's a lot of cognates in the Hebrew language. Okay. We could say that it has to do with evolution of the language. So in this case, our parent root is ayin kaf, and it means to, it means heel in the sense of the word, or anklet. Okay, and so we'll talk about that in a minute. But ayin kaf itself is to see the palm. Okay, to see the palm. And we're going to talk a minute about that. But the whole idea is to see the palm, or to restrain. And I'm going to explain that in a minute. This anklet thing is kind of the idea of something being bound on the ankle. Okay, so let's talk a minute about that. And actually, I'm sorry. So I didn't show you guys that before. Here is our word. Here's our word. Okay, means heel, by what is restrained, right? When taking a step forward, what is restrained. Okay, now let me explain to you where this is coming from. What type of footwear did ancient Hebrews have? They had sandals. What is something that is not supported when you wear a sandal? That is your ankle. So what's interesting about this is an example of a Hebrew word that is actually idiomatic. What do I mean by that? It means swollen ankle, as in an ankle that has been restrained or strained by twisting. It's been hurt, and so it's swollen now, which means that it is preventing you from taking a step. In Hebrew thought, that was the concept of restraint, right? Now, furthermore, there was definitely a fettering of slaves or a fettering of captives in a war to prevent them from escaping. And then, of course, we start to get into the idiomatic sense of what it means, right? Okay. Now, the reason why this is important is because when we're looking at this idiom, we see that the concrete word is heel, right? Which contains the ankle as well. And of course, anklet in the sense of something that is bound around the heel. But restrain is our main action that occurs, okay? Restraint is our action that is occurring. So as a result of that, then what we have is we have the restraining of the heel when taking a step forward. That's the idea of an anklet. Okay, so it's a fetter. It's something to prevent you from taking a step. That's the word akav. And that, of course, is where we get the name Jacob, because he grabbed a hold of Esau's ankle when Esau was being born. Now, this starts to get a little bit kind of fuzzy in terms of the evolution of the word. But in general, we can continue to look at the word heel, even in this concept of scorpion. Why? Because the scorpion always struck the foot, and it caused the foot to swell, and then you could not walk, you couldn't step. So this all has to do with swelling, has to do with the ankle, and has to do with the heel. But the idiomatic concept here is going to be ayin kof bet, but it's going to be taken back to ayin kaf. So we'll talk about that in a minute in terms of why it's important to take it back to that original letter. So in this case, what's the principle here? Well, the principle is to see the palm, or to see the conforming, or to see the grabbing of the heel. That's what's being described here, is to witness the grabbing of the heel with the palm. Okay, because this this kaf right here, it's a final kaf right there, is actually the open palm wrapping around something, right? Oftentimes we see it as conform, as in conform to the staff, right? Or to be tame, etc., etc. Now, there's a few reasons why this is so important, but the biggest one is that the name of our parasha is Ekev, okay? Coming from the root akav, heel. So by adding the bait to this idea of the swollen heel, we get the result, or we get the outcome, okay? So that's how that's working. And I know that that's probably a little bit confusing, probably lost a few of you in this because it's very idiomatic right now. And that's why I said the Hebrew language is idiomatic. It is not asking you permission to be idiomatic. It just is. And you have to kind of work with it in order to get to where you need to get. Okay. So when we're dealing with idiomatic usage of words that have no other meaning but the idiom, it's difficult to translate that into English. The way that I want you to think about this is the idea that there's actually a Hebrew word that means to prevent somebody or restrain somebody from doing something. okay? And that thought process was to restrain somebody from taking a step, because the final step was the result, okay? I know that's all a little bit confusing, but the best way I could put it to you is that this is the reward or consequence for an action. And in this case, the action is Shema. So let's go take a look at the word Shema. So getting back into our text, we can easily navigate to the word Shema here, okay? And just take our Strong's Concordance number 8085 and copy that over to the lexicon. Okay. Now, here is the deal. To perceive or apprehend by the ear, to listen with attention. Okay. And if we look here, to a careful hearing of someone or something, as well as responding appropriately in obedience or action. Okay. That's the word Shema. And it's coming from Shin Mem. You'll notice all of this is going to stem from the parent root, Shin Mem. So let's go take a look at that real quick. We've looked at it before, but we'll look at it again. Okay. The concrete is a breath. The action is to breathe. And the abstract is desolate. Okay. So let's talk a minute about this. So the Shin is going to fall into the area of the two front teeth, going to fall into the area of destruction, pressure, and like a force moving something in a certain direction, okay? Usually a downward pressure. All right. So now the Mem is water. Idiomatically, it's chaos. The Hebrews were very big on order. They believed that things needed to be set in order. They used words to describe order that we have inappropriately translated as light. And in the process of translating it as light, we have erred in our understanding of Genesis 1. We've erred in our understanding all along the way. Whenever we encounter the word light, we're actually encountering the word order. Chaos then could be equated to darkness, and therefore there is an underlying concept here of breath or breathe, but the desolate part is the idea of wind blowing over, of a dry wind blowing over moist ground and pulling the moisture up out of the ground, that ground cracking and becoming dry and no longer having the moisture attached to it. Now, there are two things that are significant about this. The first one is that that's the abstract. So let me help you understand this. When a Hebrew would take a breath, when the ancient Semites would take a breath, that was the Shin Mem. But in their thought process, the action was the action of breathing, right? Okay. And so now what we have is this concept of this idea of breathing or taking a breath, okay? But then all of a sudden we start to get into the abstract and it's desolate. So let's make something clear here. If I blow, you can feel the air. Remember, in Hebrew understanding, the concrete element was the precedence. So what's the concrete element of breathing? A breath. What is it? You can feel it and you can hear it. Right? You can feel it and you can hear that breath. Now, the significance of that is going to come into play here in a minute, but the most important thing to know is that's concrete. You can see it, hear it, or you can touch it. You can feel and you can hear breath. So we fall into our concrete realm of seeing, hearing, and touching, not tasting or smelling. That didn't play a role in the senses of a Hebrew. The reason why this is important is because when we start to encounter Shin Mim in that sense, we can understand why abstractly it could be desolate. Because why? Because truly, desolation is the result or the final process of wind blowing. In other words, it's what's left over after the wind is gone. But realize there are words in Hebrew that are in the concrete for dry ground, for dryness, etc. But this is an abstract desolation, which means what? It's philosophical. It's a philosophical desolation. So the word desolate may not be the best word to be used here. Let's take a look at this really quick. So the word desolate right here is coming off of the word Shin Mim, and it is a blowing over the land, pulls the moisture out of the ground, drying it up, making it a place of ruin or desert. Okay? Mishma is desolate. Shaman is desolate. Shamam is dryness or desolation. Look at how many times it's used as desolation, right? It's not really until, look at this guilt, right? To feel desolate, as if what? As if the moisture has been pulled out of you. That's where that's how they're identifying that emotion. Okay. And then we've got Shaham, which is the breath of the sky, and Shama, which is the sky itself, and Hashamayim is the place of the breaths of the sky, also known as heaven in the English. The upper atmosphere consists of an apparent great vault or arch over the earth. And of course, we know that there's theories about that was lost during the flood, et cetera, et cetera. Even so, look, we even have garlic in here in the sense of breath or its strong odor or its strong wind, okay? You see how many times this is going for desolate here, right? You see how many times, and then all of a sudden, boom, a Geshem, okay? A Geshem, which is the drawing of a gamel, which a gamel is a man carrying water from a watering hole back to the tent. A Geshem is a strong rain, a downpour, okay? And then we have Nasham, which is the drawing of a seed sprout, meaning to continue in the sense of more life or the next generation. And so Neshama is the breath of God. How do we know that? Because this is what it says in Genesis. Let me show you. Now, I know that we have been over this before, but there are different ways to look at this word and these verses. So when we're in Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, it says, God formed man out of the dust of the ground, right? Then he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. There it is, neshmat, the breath of life, or breath, or spirit, okay? From the root shama, from the root nasham, to pant, okay? Okay, so now getting back to our discussion, we keep moving along. We have shamad, which is annihilation or extermination or destruction. My gosh, how is this how does this have to do with listening? I'm getting scared here. Okay, then we have shin mem tet, a letting down or throwing down by shaking loose. Okay. Still dealing with destroying, destruction. And all of a sudden we get to oil. We take the noon, we put it on the back of the word, and now all of a sudden it is oil as in the breath, right? Okay. And that is the word or shemen, which is the word for oil, a semi-liquid, often oily, thick, usually olive oil used as medicinal ointment, also meaning fat or rich. Okay. Then we've got the number 8, which of course we talked about, that has to do with fatness, right? We've talked about that before. Shemini. And then we have Shema, a careful hearing of something as well as responding appropriately in obedience or action. Okay. Now, let me show you where that is important. Going to Exodus chapter 19, what I believe to be the gospel. Okay. What I believe to be the gospel is Exodus 19, 5 and 6. Now, if you will obey me and keep my covenant, you will be my own special treasure from among all the peoples on the earth. For all the earth belongs to me. You will be my kingdom of priests, my holy nation. This is the message you must give to the people of Israel. Let's take a look at that word, obedience. Root, Shema. Okay. So when he says, if you obey me, what he's saying is, if you listen to me, right? Okay. Now we're going to go down to, where Moses tells the people, okay. And all the people together said, we will do everything the Lord has commanded. No. In the Hebrew, it says, we will Shema. Okay. We will Shema. We will do and we will obey. We will Shema. Okay. So now it is important. I'm sorry, that's not the word Shema right there. We will do everything the Lord has commanded. We will action. We will action. Okay. Now, then we see them, if we go into where it says, if you will obey. And now this word, just so you know, the word Shema is used so much in Torah. It is actually used 1,159 times. Okay. 1,159 times. So we don't have time to go through all of these scriptures. But what I want to show you is in, I believe it's going to be Exodus. Actually, no, we need to go back to that one. I go down to Exodus right here. Now, remember, the first time they said, we will do, right? We will do. Now, this time, they used the word Shema. Let's go to Exodus 24:7. Exodus 24:7. Okay. For the Lord God of heaven, who took me from among my okay, that's Genesis. That was my problem. Exodus 24:7. Okay, here we go. He took the book of the covenant and read it aloud to the people. And again, they all responded, we will do everything he says, but then look at what's at the end. And we will listen. We will do what he says and we will listen. So you see the difference between Exodus 19 and Exodus 24 as a part of them agreeing to the covenant here, or agreeing to what I call the gospel, where he says, you will be my own special people. They said, we will do it. But they did not say they would listen. But here they say they would listen. Okay, so that's just a side note concerning the word Shema. But what I want you to see is that it's being doubled as the word obey. Okay, so now going back over here, we have this concept of a careful hearing of someone or something, as well as responding appropriately in obedience or action. How did we go from desolation to actually being obedient? How do we go from desolation to fatness? How do we go from desolation to rain? How do we go from desolation to the sun? Okay, so in this case, the Shemesh is the sun. It is the luminous body around which the earth revolves and from which it receives heat and light. The sun is what causes what? The drying. What causes the desolation in the first place? They understood this. In fact, a Shemesh is a hot wind from the sun causing desolation. So Shemesh itself doesn't mean sun. It means the heat from the sun moving as wind, drawing up the land, taking away the moisture or causing desolation. But remember, that's just the what? Abstract. It was a philosophical understanding. There were other Hebrew words for drying and for dryness and for heat. The word cham is the word for heat in Hebrew. Okay, so let's go now and let's look at our board again. And let's talk about what we've discovered so far. So what have we discovered? We know this. Actually, you know what? I want to do a red square here. Red squares for our roots, right? Okay, that is our root. Now, when we're dealing with this, I'm just going to write root here. Okay, when we're dealing with this, we need to figure out what this is. Okay, so in this case, this is the drawing. So this is the two front teeth, right? And then this is water or chaos. And then this is an eyeball. Okay. And what do we know about the ayin? When we are dealing with the ayin in ancient Hebrew idiomatic understanding, it is the eye looking to and fro, bearing witness. So this is to bear witness of the breath. Bear witness of the breath, or see the breath. And actually, you know what? We're going to go ahead and we're going to change this back to what it was. See the breath. See the breath. Okay. Remember, that doubles as the word obey, to see the breath. Okay, now we need to do something else. Because why? Because there are two different words for the word breath. Sham and rach. I'm going to get to rach here in a moment. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you to the word neshama in Genesis, chapter Genesis chapter 2, where it's first used, okay, to verse 7. And when we go into 2 verse 7, we're just going to jump down. We're going to go straight to neshama. We're going to jump down to where it is used. And this is what I want you to see. Everything that breathed and lived on dry land died. The next usage of the word neshama is in Genesis 7:22. So let's go there. Genesis 7:22. Everything that breathed and lived died. And what I want you to see is neshama, ruach. Nishmat, ruach. Nishmat, ruach. What is that? That is the breath of life, is how that's translated in the King James. But literally, there's not this little thing right here, just so you guys know, is not in the scroll. I'm not going to roll to Genesis 2 or Genesis 7 to show you that, but it's not in the scroll, and it is not part of the Hebrew understanding of this scripture. It is put there because there is a belief that that is the quote unquote breath of life. Okay. So we know on this side, we have this idea of breath or spirit. Let's just go there really quick. Breath or spirit. On this side, we have the idea of wind, breath, mind, or spirit. Wind, breath, mind, or spirit. Okay. So here is our word ruach. So we have two different words for breath being used in the same area, and therefore they called it the breath of life. But let's talk a minute about the word ruach. So what would be the difference between the two? Well, this is how I want you to think about it. When I go, it is a visible breathing action. So that's definitely sham, shin mim, right? Sham. And then you can hear it. So there's our concrete. Yes, we have it as the abstract as desolation, and 90% of that parent root doubles as the word desolation. And only once or twice does it actually have another meaning, one of which is to listen or obey, one of which is the sun, one of which is oil, and one of which is a downpour of rain. Okay, so now what we have is we have the idea that the actually dries and removes moisture from the ground, right? But that's the word breath. Well, let's take a look at the word ruach really quick. Strong's Concordance number H7307. Going into our lexicon, we'll just drop that into our search. Remove the Strong's Concordance number. And what we have is a natural movement of air, breath, the breath of man, animal, or God, the character, a space between. Okay, but it's the word wind. Okay, so how are we getting to the word wind from a resh and a chet? Let's go take a look. Well, we've done enough study of this. You guys should be very familiar with this. The resh chet does not mean spirit. Ruach does not mean spirit. The resh, here we go, right here. The resh is a picture of the head of a man. The chet, a picture of a wall that separates the inside from the outside. Combine these mean man outside. Okay, before we get into the ancient Hebrew nomadic definition, right away, right off the bat, man is outside the tent. That should be important, because what have I taught? Inside the tent is provision, protection, and instruction. Outside the tent is what? Nakedness, dryness, and exposure, right? So now what we have is this idea of, now there's a man outside the tent. That's the word ruach. That's the word spirit. That's the word pneuma in the Hebrew. I'm sorry, in the Greek, that Yeshua uses when he speaks of the spirit, that Paul uses when he speaks of the spirit, uses pneuma, which is the word ruach in Hebrew, which means man outside. Well, now we got our work cut out for us, right? How in the world does it mean man outside? Well, looking back at this, now we've got the responsibilities of the nomad outside the tent, including the feeding, watering, and caring for the livestock. Livestock are healthier and more productive when on a routine. Therefore, the man follows a routine, or a quote unquote prescribed path each day when caring for his livestock. Do you understand that the spirit is not some ghost? The spirit is not something that inhabits you, and therefore now you are some different entity. But instead, the spirit is a path. Now, where do we get the idea of the spirit being a breath? Resh chet, in the child root, rach, the winds which follows a prescribed path each season. Let's talk about this. Now we get into something interesting, because all of a sudden we have prediction. We have predictability. We have the Hebrew looking at the what? Can he see the wind? No. He can hear it, and he can what? He can observe the outcome. Now, he could see the wind like in a dust storm or something like that, but the point is that usually he feels it and he can hear it. So now watch how this works. He's looking at the wind, and from season to season, it seems to blow in the same direction every time. So he begins to predict and realize that it's following a prescribed path or routine. And so in his brain, he goes, you know, this is kind of like when I go outside the tent, and I go outside the tent for very important reasons. Why? Because it's hot, dry, and what? Exposure to the sun. And so I'm going to go out there, I'm going to get my stuff done, and I'm going to go back where it's cool. And that's how it's going to work. And what's interesting is that in his mind, he says, so the wind is predictable. The wind actually follows some sort of prescribed path, as I do. I have a routine. The wind has a routine. I can predict when the wind is going to blow, and I can predict when I am going to go outside and I'm going to do my work. Okay, so there's a couple reasons why this is important. Obviously, there was a couple things that you could really rely on. You could rely on the rains coming and the wind blowing, right? You could rely on those. You could bank on those. But what's interesting about that is that that actually is what the ruach, or breath, of God actually is. It is a prescribed path. The wind is following a prescribed path. So again, we have this idiomatic process by which the word ruach does not mean wind. The word ruach means man outside. Doing what? What he's supposed to do. Why? Because you don't want to be out there otherwise. Okay? Okay. So let me show you now a diagram from a message that I gave you guys probably about a year ago, maybe more. So basically, the first thing I want to do is I just want to really quick, let's see, let's jump over here. Really quick, I want to just draw a tent. Okay. And when we're drawing the tent, of course, we have the tent door. And in that process of the tent door, then we have out. We have out. Okay, let's do that in a different color. We have out, and we have in. Right? We have in. Okay. And in the process of out and in, we have what? We have in is provision, protection, and instruction. That's in. That's all pertaining to in. Okay. And then out, we have nakedness. We have exposure. And we have dryness. And where we get that from is the principle of the Hebrew word. And let's, I'm just going to go ahead and continue with the purple for this. It is going to be bet, vav, shin, bush, or shame. Okay, this is the Hebrew word for shame. And it's the result of nakedness, and it's the result of what? Desolation. Desolation. Okay, now down here we have the opposite of that. I'll remind you, if you just reverse this, so we're just going to do a flip-flop here. We're just going to reverse this to shin, vav, bet. That is the word shuv. And by the way, let me go ahead and write the pronunciation up here really quick. I'll put it in blue. Ush. This is shuv. Shuv. And of course, we know that this is actually to, I'll remind you that this is to re, and we'll put in red parentheses here. Repent. Okay, so we have shuv, and then we've got the opposite of shuv. So this is the idea or concept of shuv, and this is the idea or concept of bush. Okay, now, but we're talking about a prescribed path. So now we take and we're going to bring yet another component in here. So let's talk about what would a Hebrew be doing outside of his tent. He would be going to war. Oh, wait, we already did red. I want to keep my colors mixed up a little bit here. Let's do yellow. Okay, so you're going to go to war. Okay, we're going to gather. We're going to cultivate. And we're going to care for. These are the reasons or the prescribed path to go outside the tent with the word ruach. And so I'm going to put out again, but this time I'm just going to put right underneath here the word ruach. Okay, so this time we are out. All right. And we are following these. So you guys remember, this was actually a message about when you should leave the tent, because there's a prescription going on here, right? Okay. Here's the thing, though, that we kind of missed in our process and thinking concerning this. Okay, I'm just going to put ruach here. Resh, vav, chet. Okay, resh, vav, chet. All right. Now, one of the things that we kind of missed was, even though, so let's talk about this a minute. Even though the resh, chet means man outside, is there ever a time where there's actually a man outside in the meaning of the words? So first we have wind. Let's take a look at this really quick. Let's jump into this over here. First we have winds. We have shovel used for winnowing grain in the wind, still related to the wind. Then we've got one who follows a prescribed path to arrive at a specific location. That's an arach, okay, or an aruch, okay, to travel, right? Arucha, an allowance, an allotment of food used for traveling, right? A path is a road that one travels, right? And an orach. Okay, and then caravan, of course, follows that orach. Then we have got racha. Racha, the ancient hand mill, consisted of two round stones called millstones. The top was turned on the top of the other to grind the grain. This top stone always followed the same path on the top of the other. So racha was the ancient hand mill. And then we've got racha, which is a millstone. Okay, still following what? A path, but definitely not the man outside per se. Then we've got ruach. The Hebrew nomads were very familiar with the wind patterns, as they would follow a prescribed path indicating the coming season. From this word comes the idea of breath, as it is the wind of man. Now we're getting somewhere, which also follows a prescribed path, inhaling and exhaling. Ruach, right, is a smell, right? Like the pleasing aroma, right? The pleasing aroma, odor or scent, or wind of a flavor, as it were, to be refreshed, as in taking a deep breath. Then we've got, of course, ruach as the word wind, okay? And then we've got respite, as in relief from labor, punishment, or trouble. So we find that we can gain relief from the heat of the wind, as it were. Then we've got yarach, which is the moon following a prescribed path. Here we are again. This has nothing to do with the man outside. It has to do with his routine. Has to do with his routine, has to do with the prescribed path. But I want you to notice something very important. I haven't got there yet. We're going to get there. Then we've got riach, which is the wind, breathing, right? Aroma, same principle. Then we've got derech, to follow a certain path, right? To step upon, to take a step, a journey, as in treading. The stringing of a bow is the treading, as in the foot is stepped over the bow and using the leg to bend it, okay? And so now we've got that you're treading upon a bow in order to string it. Back to the word road, path again, zarach, the rising of the sun in the eastern horizon, a prescribed path of the sun. Now we've got the sun involved, right? Okay. Trade as in following a path and trading goods on that path, right? Merchandise from traders who travel that path. This is kind of like the Silk Road, right? And then we've got the word black from, we've got the word black from the, what they did here is used sakhar from trader. And then we've got the word merchandise, which is sakharua. And then we've got black as in black goats, black goat hair of the traders. The Ishmaelites used black goat hair to make their tents. Where they learned that? From their papa, from Abraham. Okay, merchandise, etc. Ride, rachav, ride, to sit and travel in conveyance, okay, as in to ride an animal or a chariot. Rachav is rachev is a vehicle, a wheeled transport such as a wagon or chariot, also following what? A path, okay, chariot. Okay, then we're back to trade. We've got knee in the sense of bending the knee to ride, okay. Then we've got rechal. A rechal is, I'm sorry, a rakil. A rakil is a talebearer or a slanderer, somebody who's a traveler who's telling stories or tale bearing, okay? And then we've got sharak as from the wind, a whistling sound. Here we are back to the wind. And then flute as a part of sharach, okay? Mishruchi is a flute, a special kind of flute. Okay, so what are we getting here? There's three very important points. The first one is man outside is the actual idiom. But does it mean a man outside a tent? No, it is all about the routine that he does outside the tent, okay? The routine that he does outside the tent, or the responsibilities that he does outside the tent, or the reasons to go outside the tent, had to do with the concept of a routine. The wind was predictable. It followed a routine. The rivers follow a routine. The breath of man follows a routine. But there's something else very important here. Did anybody notice in any one of these words that there was something static, something that sat still? The answer to that question is no. The answer to that question is actually scary. There literally is no word in this definition of the word ruach that actually talks about sitting still. What does that mean? That means there is movement along a path, which means what? That there's a flow. Now, to get into the depth of this, the way I want you to think of it is, instead of thinking of it, and we talked about this in the Midrash for the last time that we discussed this, but this is going to go deeper. Instead of thinking of it as walking down a beaten path on a trail with a bunch of flora and fauna on the outside of that trail, and possibly something trying to hinder you from going down that trail, right? That's our image of Satan. That's our image of the thorns on the side of the path, causing you to turn and not be walking down the path, or to turn away from the path to try to find another path because this one is too treacherous, etc. I want you to think of it more as a hose that water flows through. And I want you to think of the idea that when you are bearing witness of the breath, you're bearing witness of the ruach. What you're doing when it says what the Lord has said we will do, but then also it says we will obey. In the Hebrew, that's asa and shema. But when we get into this idea of the word shema, all of a sudden we get into this idea of observing the breath. But it always equates to the concept of obedience. Even in Jeff's definition, he said it's not only the hearing part, but it's the doing part. And that doing part, interestingly enough, is an action. There's an actual movement. So then I started to kind of ask the question in my brain, as I'm looking at all these things and I see these definitions, I ask, what does that mean for me? And what I mean by that is okay, when I was in the church sitting in a pew on Sunday morning, my understanding of the Holy Spirit was something that was a person, the third person of the Trinity, subject to Christ and to God, and was an actual entity that had personality. It was a person, had personality, and it was identifiable separate from the Father and the Son. But then when I started reading the ancient Hebrew lexicon of the Bible and found the word ruach, which all this time I had designated as this other person of the Trinity, I find that it's actually a prescribed path. So I began to develop my brain around the idea that it is actually a dirt path going down this length of land, and there's these weeds or these trees growing up around it, and there's this beaten path that you're supposed to walk. And then I could picture myself straying off the path. But the problem is that doesn't necessarily contain a flow. And so then I started to think, okay, so what does that mean for me? All of a sudden, I am not dealing with what I thought I was dealing with. So here's how this works. First of all, one of the things that right off the bat we need to get straight, the word ruach does not mean entity. It is a flowing pathway. Something is moving down a conduit, and we observe it. And when we see that something moving down that conduit, then we perform an action. And that is the outcome of seeing the wind, seeing the breath. So watching this flow move in a certain direction. Now, we could get practical and say, okay, yeah, when God shows you that he's at work, it is his invitation for you to join him, or otherwise he's not going to show you. So every single time you see him at work, you have to respond in kind. That's a given, okay? But what about when we start to get into the discussion about the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law? What's intriguing about this is Yahweh does not tell them to be obedient in the sense of reading the action and doing the action, but hearing the action, which then we go from the word hearing, because we can't really translate Hebrew into English. We go from the word hearing into this idea of watching a flow, watching the wind. How do we watch the wind? How do we watch the wind? Remember, Shin Mem is wind or breath, right? And so, and of course, we know that in the abstract, it's causing desolation. Why is it abstract? Because they can't see wind do the damage until the damage is done, right? Even if you see a dust devil ripping through stuff, the damage is being done, but you can't see the wind. You can just see the stuff being moved by the wind. Okay. So the reason why this is important is because now when we get into the idea of watching the wind, we know that's impossible to do. So why did Yahweh, when he was, remember, Yahweh says to Miriam and Aaron, when I deal with a prophet, they dream dreams or see visions, but not so with my servant Moses. I speak to him mouth to mouth. In other words, what I say, he says, and what he says, he writes down. And what he writes down is actually a transcript of our conversation. Meaning what? What Yahweh says is what he writes down. And so he uses the word Shema. Whether Moses knew the word or not is irrelevant. What's important is he uses the word Shema, which is an impossible act. You can't see the wind. You can only hear the wind, and you can only feel the wind. Okay? So how do we observe wind blowing when wind is not seeable? Well, remember what I said about he would not judge with the hearing of his ears, which is Shema, or the seeing of his eyes, right? The principle or the idea is that it is a feeling. You feel the flow going in a certain direction. Now, for those of you who have never experienced this, you are probably at this moment skeptical. You are probably at this moment going, I've never felt that. You are probably at this moment going, well, that's just another message that doesn't apply to me. But the truth is, and this is no offense to you, you actually are not trying to observe the wind. You're not. You read the letter. You look at the words, and you do at least the bare minimum that you need to do, because most likely part of the reason why you don't listen, why you don't try to see, is because there's actually a part of you that doesn't necessarily even want to do the things written on the page. It's just your understanding of God is that you're supposed to do this. Now, there may be those who have logically explained to you and convinced you that Torah is real and that the Christian church misled people on the understanding of Torah, but that's still the written word. Literally, the people say, what he has said, we will do. When he says, if you will listen to my commands, if you will listen to my commands, and you will and be careful to keep them, shamar, guard them, then you will be my own special people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, which Peter calls out and says that's what you become when you were sealed into the new covenant. Okay? Now, the reason why this is so important is because when we start to get into this understanding, you're going to find two very important things. Number one, the flow has to be discernible. The flow has to be quantifiable in some manner because you can't see it. So you either have to hear it, and I don't mean with your ears, or you have to feel it. Now, the best way I could put it this to you is that there is an energy present within you that you have felt from time to time, didn't realize that it was the thing that causes the chills. It's the thing that makes you think that you need to keep this commandment or need to be obedient here. It's the thing that makes you think that you're in sin. It's the thing that tells you need to pull over on the side of the road and help the guy who's broken down. It's all of those things, but it is not visible. It has nothing to do with height, width, depth, or time. Height, width, depth, and time are visible, quantifiable measurements. Height, width, and depth are visible, quantifiable measurements. Time is quantifiable over time, as it were. And I know that's a circular argument, but time is the progression of us from one moment to the next, which is quantifiable. We have it in terms of either a spring and a gear system that moves at exactly the correct amount to cause a 60-second period become a 60-minute period, become a 24-hour period, and be accurate enough that we don't lose our sense of time. Or it's voltage is being applied across a piece of crystal, and therefore it reverberates that voltage into an oscillation, and that oscillation then becomes a 1-second interval. So it's quantifiable, but guess what? That is not how the Ruach works. Why is this so important? Because that means that everything that pertains to life and godliness, everything that pertains to our process, whether it be our physical existence in height, width, depth, and time, whether it be our actual interactions with others, whether it be a process of interaction with God, or whether it be something to do with the physical condition of our bodies, etc., we are not dealing with what you see. So what you see is irrelevant. What you observe is irrelevant. Why? Because what we need to actually be doing if we are outside the tent is going with this flow. The flow goes in a certain direction, and that gives us the instruction. It's not written on a page. Get over the fact that you're just going to have to trust the process. You're going to have to get over the fact that it's not enough to just look at words on the page. For the sake of the fact that I'm sure it would probably break, I will not throw the scroll on the ground today, but I can tell you that's about how useless those words are to you. Because the truth is if they are not applied in a manner that is present in the process of this Ruach, we have a problem. Why? Because what the law could not do in that it was weak in the flesh, Christ did, or God did by sending his own son in the likeness of sinful flesh, that the righteous requirements of the law will be fulfilled in us who do not walk according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. You need to understand that it is an unction. It is a flow in a certain direction. Why is that so important, that it's a flow in a certain direction? Because if you're going this way and it's going that way, then you are in the flesh. Easy stuff. Easy stuff. And if it's going that way and you're going this way, according to Scripture, you're an enemy with God. Romans chapter 8, Romans chapter 5, Romans chapter 7. You're in death, Romans chapter 7. But if you're going in the direction of the Ruach, which is what? Not some entity walking down a path. It is the path, but it's not a path. It's actually a conduit. It's a conduit with something flowing through it. Now, something that's flowing through it is some sort of energy where we start to get into that the Holy Spirit is the intensification of all power in the universe, in some way, shape, or form, dummied down for the realm of action. The realm of action cannot contain the intensity of spiritual energy that Yahweh is. Therefore, it's a dumbing down, dialed back version of him in that process. But the realm of action contains a direction, a force, and a purpose behind that force. We know in general that those forces are mechanisms in operation as a result of what we do here, which brings us back to ekev in the sense of something that is restraining the heel or is the reward or consequence of an action. Now, restraining the heel, reward and consequence is lost in the idiomatic understanding in Hebrew that an American, English, westernized, social democratic person is not going to grasp. Sorry. But if you just accept it as that is talking about the result, is talking about the reward or consequence, then you'll understand that what it says is it shall come to pass that the consequence for you listening shall be, and then it goes into an explanation where Yahweh reiterates what he said in Exodus chapter 19. Okay, so there's a few reasons why this is important. The first one is because then that means that the Ruach is somewhat predictable because it's following a prescribed path. Meaning what? We can look to the letter of the law as a guide on what direction we think the Ruach is going to go. Then we can consult with that. How do we do that? All you got to do is stop moving for a moment and feel the flow. Once the flow is moving, you'll know which direction to go. But don't just automatically assume you're moving because you are actually following the letter. Because one thing I can safely say for sure is the Sabbath says don't carry a burden, but Yeshua says who wouldn't pull their sheep out of a ditch if they were in it and they couldn't get out. So I think it's very, very important to understand that Torah is actually a mechanism of the Ruach, and the Ruach obviously is always going to follow Torah, but the Ruach is going to guide in the direction of how to apply, how astringent or how loosely to apply that. What about when we get into the idea of where it says that you have not lied to man, but to the Holy Spirit, and Ananias and Sapphira die? What about when it says that we can grieve the Holy Spirit? Well, it seems as though the principle or the concept behind that falls into the realm of hindering that flow. Don't ask me quite how that works. We could probably discuss that in Midrash. But you need to stop believing it's a person. And you need to stop believing that it is an entity that has a separate process from you in the sense of how things are supposed to go. I'll put it to you simply. It just says flat out, if you walk according to the Spirit, these things will happen. You walk according to the flesh, ego, these things will happen. If you're not feeling that flow, you're in the flesh. Now, there are definite things that you can possibly do to test that, right? Ask yourself, can I pray right now? Ask yourself, can I sing right now? Can I sing a song of joy to the Lord? Right? Can I give right now? Do I feel generous or do I feel stingy? The Spirit is never stingy. In fact, the Spirit is never going to guide you to be stingy. Okay? Do I feel restless or do I have shalom? Do I feel guilty? That's going back to shame. You're outside the tent for the wrong reason. Okay. So what I understand from what Yahweh is trying to communicate to us here is that there is a direction you are supposed to go, and there is something that is indicating that direction you're supposed to go that exists as instruction that we may construct into a thought of God communicating with us, but generally speaking, there's just a pull, as it were, in that direction, or a flow in that direction. Now, the relevance comes into play when you think about why Moshe is discussing these things with the Israelites at this time. They're about to go into the promised land, right? They're about to go into the promised land, and they're going to need to follow the lead of the Ruach. Okay, so what have we learned? We've learned that obedience is not as much reading the letter of Torah and doing that action or not doing that action, but obedience, or Shema, actually has to do with the Ruach. Meaning what? You cannot read the letter and properly obey it. Why? Because if you are not in the spirit, you are in the flesh, and the flesh is enmity against the law of God. It can't be obedient to it. It can't be obedient to it. Romans 8. And so as a result of that, basically what we can observe is that if you are reading the letter and you are carrying out the words in the page, and you don't have a spiritual experience that would indicate that you can feel a flow, you're in the flesh. Which means you need to check and see what instruction you've been given that you are refusing to carry out. And you need to also realize that if you read the Torah and obey its commandments, and that is all you do, and you don't actually have a spiritual experience, you need to realize that you are in the ministry of death. For the what? For the things of the flesh is death, but the things of the spirit is life and peace. You want to know why the Israelites missed it? Because when Yahweh gave his betrothal statement, they said, we will do it. And it's not until the reaffirmation of the covenant that they said, we will listen. And what resulted? Number one, they did not want Yahweh to speak to them. They wanted Moses to speak to them. They did not want to wait, so they created a god. Moses had to go up on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights, fasting and praying, requesting that God not destroy Israel. You need to know from that fact, it is important to understand that we are not dealing with just being able to look and do. We have to hear and do. Consequently, you can look at your life and see whether or not there is fruit of the Ruach, right? Looking at the fruits of the Spirit, because I can almost guarantee you that you are probably impatient. You are probably not kind. You are probably not compassionate. You are probably not gentle. You are probably not long-suffering. You probably don't have joy. You probably are not grateful. And yet you're still keeping the commandments. And you're wondering why in the world, with me keeping these commandments, are things not going according to Deuteronomy 28. Deuteronomy 28 says, if I keep these commandments and do this thing, then I'm going to be blessed. But you don't realize that you're missing something. You're missing something. Now, when I say those things and I say, you're probably this, you're probably that, I want you to look at your life. I want you to take a moment and stop being this self-righteous, Torah-observant American Christian and start thinking like a Hebrew and ask yourself, are you always angry? Are you always sad? Are you always this? Are you always that? That are the opposites of the fruit. Because if the fruit is not present, you're in the flesh. If you're in the flesh, then Torah is a ministry of death, which means what? No matter how hard you try to keep it, you'll be walking in lack and decrease. Now, I know this is a very hard message and a very difficult thing to hear, but you have not honored the Shema. You haven't. You have been trying to do what the Israelites did. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. Because eventually you will have to harden your heart. And when that happens, then what? You will start treating people wrongly. And as you treat them wrong, if they cry out to Yahweh and they are in any way, shape, or form in the category in which if you cry out to them, that he will deal with you, y'all, I don't know that you necessarily even fear God enough to know better than to go that route. Now you understand a little bit why when you are outside the tent and it doesn't feel like there's a purpose going on, you begin to feel unclean. Remember, clean and unclean, holy and unholy are not about some sort of respect for some deity. And they're not about some sort of need to be separate from other people. But they are a reduction or intensification of energy. Remember, the word kadosh has to do with the sheen, the dalet, and the kaf. The two front teeth, the door to the tent, and the intensification of light at sunset, which we have condense, destroy, etc. And then we have movement. So again, even in the word Ruach HaKadesh, Kadesh contains movement. All this time, I've pictured this path that I was trying to walk that seemed like it was the right path to walk. And therefore, as I could see down the path, I knew which way to go. I could see that there was no paths on either side. There was no fork in the road, but there were times when the path got uncomfortable because of the thorn bushes or whatever, and they caused me to turn my head. Remember, that's Hasatan. Remember, Hasatan or Satan is the Samek Tet Nun, or the continual turning, right? Or the thorn that continues to cause turning. And so as I would look down the path, I would think to myself, this is the direction I need to walk. And I don't want to give in to the hindrances or the thorns on the side. What I never thought about is that it's a garden hose of really fast flowing water. And I am either going to hold on to the sides of the hose, trying to prevent myself from being pulled down that way, or I'm going to let myself go and go down that flow. And in doing that, I'm actually walking in my purpose. In doing that, I am not walking in the flesh. And in doing that, I'm doing what I am supposed to do. Now, I know we've talked about the Ruach being a conduit before, but the depth of this gets into the word Shema. When we start to think about that, the breath of man is the wind of man, and the breath of God is the wind of God, and the wind of God is following a prescribed path. It's not actually the path itself. It's some energy moving in a certain direction, and us moving with it. Where this becomes relevant is when the fire comes. You see, the fire has a very interesting way of getting rid of the fluff. Trials and adversities expose the heart. Remember, Yahweh said in this week's parasha in Deuteronomy 8 that he let them go hungry to show them their hearts, right? Trials, fire, all that show the real us. We may blow smoke up people's butts all day long. There's an idiom. We may act deceptively. Let me change the idiom to an actual literal wording so you understand what I'm talking about. You may act deceptively, trying to get people to believe that you are okay, or that you are in right standing with God, or that you are doing what you're supposed to be doing when you're actually a mess. So we may convince people of that all day long, but when the fire comes, it will bleh out of your mouth. It will almost be unpreventable. And so as a result of that, what I want you to think about is at that moment, when that's exposed, what is Yahweh trying to tell you? You're walking according to the flesh. Do you understand that if you get angry about a circumstance, or you get impatient about a circumstance, or you react a certain way, that does not reflect the fruit of the Spirit? You're in the flesh. And while you're in the flesh, you're going to hurt others. Get over it. That's the process of your existence. You either walk in the Spirit, and then you will do unto the least of these, and you need to really consider who the least of these are, because I'm going to tell you who they're not. They're not the people that you have a good opinion of. The least of these are not the people who you think have a good process, a good natural order process of sanity or existence. That's not the least of these. In fact, I will propose to you that some of you are convinced in your mind that as long as you do something for somebody, you're doing it for Yeshua, and that's not what it says. It says, unto the least of these. If you do it unto the least of these, you're doing it to me. Okay, so having said that, it is time for you to understand that if you continue to operate in the flesh and you continue to not do what the Ruach is doing, not only will you hurt people, but you are operating in a ministry of death. Lack and decrease is coming, guys. Lack and decrease is coming to your life. And in that process of lack and decrease coming to your life, I promise you, it's going to affect your health, your finances, etc. You're going to say, oh, I'm under attack. I'm being attacked because I'm righteous. If you're able to say those words, that's not why you're being attacked. You say, oh, I know Satan's attacking me because I'm in obedience to God. No, you're in the ministry of death, and you are actually doing damage to the kingdom of heaven. And those are the people Paul advised us to cast out. Not those who are in need of medical attention, but those who are actually doing the damage. So I highly recommend that you take an examination of your life and you figure out what percentage of the fruits of the Spirit are present in you, because that would indicate how much you're actually listening to God. And I propose to you that it's actually a rebellious heart that doesn't listen to him. It is actually the part of you who has a problem with God that actually is operating in the ministry of death. You claim that you love him. You claim that you are walking in the Torah, and yet you do not have a demonstration that you are actually honoring the Shema. What's interesting about that, and this will be my final thought, Just going to roll this scroll back really quick, and I'm going to pull up my scroll cam again. And we're going to look one more time at the Shema. Do you see these two letters? They say witness. But what they don't do, and remember, these are just scribes writing on a page. So don't get it twisted into something where it's like, oh yeah, Yahweh put it that way. No. Scribes did this. But what they don't do is they don't tell you who the witness is. See, Aid means witness. Ayin Dalet means witness. Who is witnessing your Shema? Who is witnessing, or are you bearing witness of the Shema? You see, that Ayin Dalet is pretty significant. That Ayin Dalet is basically a testimony for or against you. You may say to yourself, and this is actually in the scripture, you may say to yourself, oh, well, I am prospering right now, and I have many good things happening. I have been given positions of leadership, or I have extra money, or I have lots of friends. And therefore, that must mean that I am okay with God. That may be true. But you need to understand that the Torah testifies on your behalf or against you. And the Torah is a mechanism of judgment, which is what? Even distribution, which means what? If you treat one person a certain way, you need to treat the other person a certain way. That's justice. That's righteousness. If you give to one organization, you need to give to another organization. Now, obviously, availability of funds, I get it. But what I'm trying to tell you is that if you make a judgment or think that you do not have to treat somebody a certain way, you are in serious error, because Torah warns you about that. So, simple. This is the best way I could put it to you. I know for myself, after this message, I'm going to take a knee. I'm going to surrender to God and make sure. I'm going to take an examination of my life and see, am I more the fruits of the Spirit or am I not? And if I'm not, who cares if I'm keeping Torah, because that would be irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. I am not demonstrating that I am honoring the Shema. That's what I'm going to do. That's how I'm going to deal with this. And that's my examination. I highly recommend that you do the same, because I propose to you that if you don't have a demonstration of the fruits, then you're not actually walking in the Spirit. And therefore, you can't hear, and you're not actually going in the flow or the prescribed routine, which is the only reason you should be outside the tent. And I propose to you that you would be outside the tent, farting around, not following the Ruach, because either provision, protection, or instruction were rejected. In other words, you chose not to be in the tent. Look back and see if there's instruction you've been given. Look back and see who provided for you. Look back and see who protected you. Or did you refuse those things? Or did you say that you did them yourself? That's another reason you could be outside the tent. Because if you're out there and you're not following the prescribed path, you're naked, exposed, and ashamed. For those of you who are on YouTube, I will bid you Shabbat Shalom, and we'll go ahead and end the live stream.